Hello, hello, and happy Easter, YouTube. Interesting thing about communion is actually the first communions were actually held in Egypt when during the spring equinox, largely during the spring equinox. But in Easter, instead of bread and wine, they used cornbread and beer, having to do with the wheat and barley to celebrate the returning sun and the revitalizing conditions of spring. So that's actually kind of interesting. But anyways, I'm going to talk to you today about a few issues. But first, I want to get something off my chest. And I don't want to sound delusional or like a schizophrenic, like a schizo. But let's be honest here. Um, I think that, I mean, maybe not wrestling, people in wrestling themselves, but certainly people associated with wrestling, probably the Raid Killers, the Mike Johnsons and Ryan Sattins of the world. I honestly believe they follow my account on YouTube or my page because I have just noticed it seems like ever since I started back trying to upload wrestling videos because I really stopped not uploading but sharing them in my playlist. I just noticed that those videos don't seem to last very long. They go away pretty fast. And I think that's horseshit. I just want to say I think that's bullshit because let's be honest. I know that you know it. A lot of people in wrestling probably don't like me, and this country doesn't like me. I am, for all intents and purposes, and I don't know if that's even the correct phrase, but the point is, for all intents and purposes, this country doesn't like me because I am the enemy within, and not because of anything really I do, but because I tell the truth, and it is the truth. And a lot of times people don't want to hear the truth, like when I say things or I talk about things like gender, and I talk about how gender is ultimately an illusion or an illusionary concept made up at some point in history by people that just made it up. People don't like hearing that. They don't hear that. They have a lot of writing on that. So it's like that. It's like what I'm about to talk about now and what I'm going to talk about today, and that's um, basically Easter and how Easter comes from the word ishtar, and I'm going to go into that and go into the spring equinox and how it's largely all tied together in a lot of different religious holidays, not only pagan holidays, but holidays we associate with monotheism are all actually sun worship or sun veneration. But anyways, I also want to say that some videos you might want to look up, and actually, really, you can just look up anything from '96 to 2006 or 2007 in wrestling, and even in TNA from 2002 to 2011. TNA had a lot of interesting stuff, but some stuff I think you might want to look up is Katie Vick, Hot Lesbian Action, Stone Cold Beer Truck, Stone Cold Monster Truck, Undertaker tries to embalm Stone Cold. Basically, let's look up Undertaker sacrifice. Kane sets Jim Ross on fire. Mr. McMahon Kiss My Ass Club. Look up anything with like Tori Wilson and Sable bikini contest. Brian Penny's match. Viagra on a pole from WCW. All of that stuff. ECW One Night Stand from in 2005, 2006. Live Sex Celebration. Gangrel, The Brood, Vampire, Wrestling Vampire, Kevin Thorne and Ariel. All of that is great shit. Just look up any of that. It's fun. It's a load of fun, believe me. But anyways, beyond that, getting off that and back to something a little bit more serious. Because I just want to say that one reason I share those videos and I look them up and I spend so much time trying to find videos like that and share them in my playlist is because I do think they're a great source of fun and entertainment. And I think that's something, especially now during this coronavirus, but really just in this current culture of America, I think we have lost is the ability to just enjoy life and to not take everything so damn seriously. And you see that with the social justice people and the politically correct people and everything else. A lot of it is just about having fun. But all those are things you can look up. And again, just look up anything from WWE from 2002 to 2006. Anything, I don't care what it is. 2002, 2006, WWE. It'll be worth watching. It'll be worth the search. Believe me. Anyways, beyond that, back to the point of this video, the spirit of the season, the reason for the season, sun worship. Easter actually comes from the word ishtar. That was the name of an old Babylonian Canaanite sex goddess that had to do with fertility. And I think it might not be her. There's another goddess, I think Lilith, that also ties in with the first wife of Adam. That's, if you watch Banned from the Bible on History Channel, they have an episode on Lilith. And that's interesting. That's a different story altogether. But anyways, she was basically the first vampire, but she was supposedly the first wife of Adam. She left him. And some people say she shacked up with Samael, that was a Jewish angel of death. And she spawned a race of demons. And that's basically really the beginning of modern vampire myth. But anyways, Ishtar is a Babylonian goddess. It's probably, again, that's a totally different issue. I got way off track and fucked this up. Sorry. Anyways, because I like vampires, I got a little bit off track. But the point is, Ishtar was the fertility goddess in Babylon, and Easter comes from the word ishtar. Where there's some debate over that. Some people think it might have come from something else. It largely probably came from the word Ishtar. And it goes back way before Babylon. It goes back actually to Egypt. And an interesting thing about Egypt is they had a cult of Aton, or Akhenaten, and it was a monotheistic religion, just like both Judaism, especially Judaism and Islam, but Christianity also claims to be monotheistic. But they worshipped the sun, and they had one true God was the sun. They called him Aten, the Aten or the Aton, and Akhenaten actually. And by the way, let me make one thing clear, specifically point out one thing. Sun worship goes back and dates back way before the cult of Aten. And if you want someone more entertaining than me, to say the least, probably and a more interesting person to tell you about this, I would suggest looking up Michael Tessian, who's an interesting cat. Actually, he did a weird video once. I found it on here about genital mutilation or circumcision. But his take on it was very weird. I don't know. I mean, it was because he wasn't for it, but it was like he was against it for very odd reasons. That's not even the point. He was against it for very odd reasons, but that's not even the point. What I'm saying is, he is an interesting person to watch about issues having to do with the occult, esoteric part of religion, spirituality, and he talks about sun worship, and he does a video on Akhenaten and how that possibly predates and led to Judaism, that led to Christianity and Islam and so forth. But also you can go all the way back to the beginning, the early stages of Egyptian mythology, and in some ways possibly a religion that has really more in common. The Christian cult, or the Christian group specifically, is Horus and Osiris and Isis. Osiris, of course, Horus basically was a sun god who was born of miraculous birth, not a virgin birth, but he was born from his dead father Osiris, who had been slain by Seth, who from ISIL, or ISIS, not ISIL, I'm sorry, apologize, I was radio off. It used to be called Isis, if you remember. That was odd. But anyways, the goddess Isis was hovered over the dead god Osiris. Is I believe a hawk, if I'm not mistaken, an eagle or a hawk or something. Maybe it was a dove. I think it was a dove. You hear of like Venus Columbi is a dove, and you have the District of Columbia, and there's a lot of mythology. Anyway, the point is, she hovered over Osiris, became impregnated with the god Horus, who gave birth to Horus, who was essentially a miraculous savior child, who again basically resumed his ministry after being baptized by another god, and then he basically led 12 disciples, that are the 12 constellations of the zodiac. And also, oddly enough, interestingly, if you look at a coven, you have 13 people. And then, of course, if you think of Jesus as a historical person, he essentially led a coven because you had 12 people and he would be the 13th one. So that's interesting. But anyways, he did that for a number of years. He went around talking to people, wandered talking to people. He did miracles like turning uh, water into wine, and of course the sun. And he turned bread, one loaf of bread, into many loaves of bread. And of course, the sun creates bread and it creates wine. So of course, I mean, the sun would create wine and it would create bread. So, or in Egyptian mythology, it grew the wheat that made the the beer and the cornbread I began telling you about. But it begins bread, it creates bread, or anything for that matter. I think you can even make alcohol out of rice, if I'm not mistaken. I think some Asian countries make it out of rice. And of course, once again, um, the sun creates rice. It gives life. It's the source of life on earth, and without it, we would all starve and die. So it's essentially sun worship. It's all sun worship when we're born. And eventually, at the age of 40, I believe he was killed. He was crucified, was dead for 3 days, and was resurrected. And that this shares commonalities with gods all over the planet, including Dionysus of, I think, Greece, who was associated with Rhine, basically, along with I think sex, but largely Rhine, and both has to do with fertility. But he was associated with Rhine because, again, the Rhine, the grapes and things you make wine out of, comes from what? The sun. So basically, the entire concept of sun worship, and that became modern Christianity, and that's why the Pope or the bishop or priest or whoever the highest member of that particular congregation is in a Catholic church, they always hold up the sun disk. Why? Because the sun disk represents the sun. That's why Christianity puts so much emphasis on the sun. And if you read certain passages out of the Bible, he shone like light and so forth out of the Bible. They're talking about the sun. He made the blind see. Of course, you can't see in darkness. The sun makes you see. I mean, these are all parables having to do with the sun. And you can look at it on a very materialistic level and simply think that it's all sun worship. But I mean, you could even argue there's a spiritual component to that. Even in Islam, they have an imam. One of the imams, when asked by someone, how do you know that there's an afterlife, he pointed to a tree and he said, in the winter, this tree will be dead, but in the spring, it will grow again. And he basically used that as a metaphor for the afterlife. So, I mean, that's kind of an interesting take on it. But the point is, regardless, either way, it's all largely sun worship. It's pagan. It's neo-pagan. It's from Egypt, out of Egypt. And really, largely, it's from out of the caveman days. It's from the cave, is what it is. It's as old as man. Because as soon as men really started to worship religion or believe in a religion, they started to believe in the sun or sun worship. Why do you ask? They believe in why you ask? Do they believe in sun worship? Well, it's all very simple. It's because the sun is the source of life, as I said, and they know that. And they would, of course, huddle around in the darkness. A guy who talks about this, of course, is a guy who was killed. He was a conspiracy researcher credited with the 9/11 truth movement, and supposedly predicted 9/11 before it happened. I'm not saying if he did or not, but the point is, he's dead. Of course, he was killed soon after. Some people think the government killed him, whatever. But the point is, he talked about people would huddle around in the darkness around a light, and it was all light worship. And it's, of course, in Zoroastrianism, they are largely a light cult, and they have a temple where you go in, and they have a fire, they have a torch lit. And even the Olympic Games, and of course, some people say it was Nazi propaganda. I don't know, but supposedly, according to the story, ancient Greeks would carry the torch, and somebody would run with the torch all the way to the temple where the gods were, gods and goddesses, and they would light the temple, light the torch of the temple. And in ancient times, somebody would know how to. They would study this, and they would learn how to light a campfire. Pretty much, basically, is what it was. And they would cook food, and they would also use that to keep warm and to see what was around them. And if somebody else was kind of they would watching, they would gravitate towards that fire that was safe and kept them warm, and perhaps fed even, and they would go to that. So, and if he was nice, he would let them there. So that's where that comes from. And they became the first priest, along with the first pretty much everything else, because he had a secret and a knowledge that no one else had about how to keep this fire moving. So it was sun worship, and it came from, and that's why even in Luciferian and a lot of occult traditions and circles, even in Nazism, the symbol of the occult in that one of the main symbols is the lightning bolt. The SS is, of course, a lightning bolt. The reason for this is because of lightning struck a tree. And of course, that has to do with light worship, Luciferianism, form of Lucifer. I'm a form of Luciferian. I mean, I'm a humanist, but I'm also a form of Luciferian that associates with light worship. Lucifer is torchbearer, light bringer. That's what the word Lucifer is, and that's based in Prometheus, and it's a long story. Prometheus, of course, stole the fire back from the gods. He brought it back to men, and he was punished for it, and so on and so forth. And basically, the lightning bolt represents light, and it's a lot of it has to do with light worship. But the point is, sun worship is the oldest form of worship on the planet, religious worship, and really the main primary form of religious worship, even for monotheistic religions. Now, of course, when you go into Judaism, even though they have Passover, and that largely has to do with the sun passing over the earth, and actually, logically, not only does that have to do largely with the sun passing over the earth, in ancient Egypt, now you will say they passed on, but in ancient Egypt, they would say the grandmother passed over last night. Somebody passed over. Well, they call that Passover. That's where the Jewish holiday of Passover that Jesus himself supposedly, if he existed, celebrated. Well, that's essentially exactly the same thing. But the point is, they also are associated largely with Canaan and Canaanites. A large portion of them were Egyptian slaves or either that or Canaanite people that became a group and they wandered off and whatever, and they were wanderers and so forth. But they worshiped the god of Canaan. That was largely Saturn, because Saturn was the god of Canaan. Baal, of course, means Lord. The actual god was El, and you get that from that. You get probably Elohim. You get the Jewish religion possibly from that. And then you have with Islam, you have the worship of Elah, that is either a moon or god or Venus, because it could also be the current face of or state of the planet Venus from what we can see. So it's either a crescent moon and star, or it's the symbol of Venus. Either way, the point is Islam worships Venus or the moon. I'm not sure. Jews worship Saturn and Christians worship the sun, and you get your great triangular dance of the heavens, kind of. And of course, in Mecca, just like you see Conan the Barbarian, another story in part based on Horus the Avenger, you have people spinning a reel. They kidnap the bad guy, or Seth, who literally they have the god Seth. He kidnaps and enslaves these children after killing their families and taking over their villages and so forth and such. And he kidnaps and enslaves these children to spin the reel of Seth. Well, that's symbolically, that's the great reel of a number of things, but it represents the universe, the cosmos, and I forget a little bit about that because it's been a long time since I've studied that. But the point is, all of that comes together. It's all sun worship. It's very fucking interesting. And I mean, just look up Michael Tussian, or look up Zeitgeist, Peter Joseph, Michael Tussian, Jordan Maxwell, William Cooper. Wherever you look up, don't look up Alex Jones other than for entertainment. But I mean, entertainment only. But look them up. Look up the esoteric agenda. There used to be one up on, it was kind of like a user created content on YouTube that got fucked up, probably for copyright reasons, like everything does. But it was, or maybe it was some kind of PC bullshit, I don't know. But it was up. It was called Tonguezilla. I don't even remember what it was called. But there was a guy from England or Australia or somewhere talking about this shit, and he sounded like David Icke, by the way, I think. But all of that has to do with what Christianity is. And this video has took way too long and longer than what it was supposed to. But the point that I'm making, or what I'm trying to make, is it's a sun cult. Christianity is a sun cult. And there's nothing wrong with that. And by the way, it should help Christians that there is some truth to your religion, regardless of what is true or isn't true about Jesus and the supposed divinity of Jesus, whether that's true or not true or anything else. Your religion truly is about something, because the sun is very important. Without it, we would all die. The crops would not grow. It would be darkness and we'd all die. We would all die. But because of the sun, and now they're even talking about solar energy, but because of the sun, and we can even get solar energy from that, it might actually even save us from dependence on fossil fuels and oil. But because of the sun, we are alive here today. So that is something to celebrate. And it's a celebration of life and fertility, not a guy dying on a cross. If anything, you should celebrate that. So, P666.